So, welcome, friends. I'm John, Father John Deere, and welcome to this Beatitude Center Zoom session with our special guest today, Scripture scholar Wes Howard-Brook. You can find many other great upcoming Zooms at www.beatitudecenter.org. First, let me remind everyone to please mute themselves and to write any questions you might have for Wes in the chat link. Wes will speak for 45 minutes or more, I hope, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments and end at the hour and a half mark. And later we'll send out a Zoom recording link. For those who are on live, you're welcome to stay on after the recording finishes and we can debrief for a few minutes if you'd like. So I always like to begin with a little prayer. So I invite everybody, wherever you are, just to take a deep breath and just to relax and center yourself. Notice how you're feeling today, wherever you are in the world. And together, let's enter into the presence of the God of peace who loves you infinitely and personally and every human being. And let's welcome the risen, nonviolent Jesus here into our hearts and our circle. Just take a moment to ask for whatever graces of peace and love we need to do God's will. Beloved God, thank you for all the blessings of life, love, and peace that you give us. Be with us now as we reflect on your holy word, your scriptures, on the call to follow the nonviolent Jesus as peacemakers. Bless us, disarm us, heal us, inspire us, enlighten us, and strengthen us to go forward and do what we can to help end violence, poverty, and war, injustice, authoritarianism, fascism, empire, white supremacy, nuclear weapons, and environmental destruction, that we might do your will and be the people you created us to be, your holy peacemakers. In Jesus' name, amen. So, welcome again, everybody, and I'm happy to welcome back here to the Beatitude Center my friend, who I consider one of our greatest scripture scholars, Wes Howard-Brook. Since retiring from teaching at Seattle University, he's posted a whole long series on the Bible for free on YouTube called The Radical Bible, with an episode on each book of the Bible, which I highly recommend and I hope folks will look up. He's written a number of brilliant books, but I think his book on the Gospel of John, Becoming Children of God, is the greatest commentary on the Gospel of John ever written, hands down. And I can't recommend it enough. It's still in print with Whitfenstock. Today, I've asked Wes to talk about his other incredible masterpiece of a book, and I'm going to hold it up in hopes that you can all see it. Um, this is the big book, the original Orbis edition, called Come Out, My People, God's Call Out of Empire in the Bible and Beyond. It's a whole book on the whole book of the Bible, summing it all up. This is my interpretation, Wes, so don't listen. And saying, in effect, that the whole Bible and its war of myths is calling humanity out of empire, what Wes calls the religion of empire, into, I'll call it God's reign of peace, love, and justice. What Wes calls the religion of creation, called the religion of peace or love, is so, but it's so beautiful. Now, and it's really a masterpiece of scholarship and political commentary. And just to remind everybody again, Orbis Books is giving everybody on this Zoom a 30% discount if you want to order the book. And the best thing to do is call Orbis and you say, I want the Beatitude Center discount. And I think you have to give the 3-letter code BCA. I'm 90% sure that's the code. So I'll check as we're talking here. Anyway, this is one of the great books. And it's shocking when you hear Wes give an overview of the Bible as he does. And so that's what I've asked him to do today, which is really an impossible project or thing to ask anybody. But Happy you're here, Wes. And so, friends, from wherever you are, please join me in giving a warm welcome to our teacher and scholar, Wes Howard-Brook. The floor is yours, Wes.
Everybody.
Welcome.
And I see just joined in the corner Mike Wisniewski, who knew me before any of that stuff. So great to see you there, Mike, from the LA Catholic Worker. Um,
Welcome, Mike.
Mike, see what I'm wearing here?
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't even know you were coming. Well, thank you, John. And I just want to say, as we start, I hope nobody will be insulted to hear that I'm before a group of mostly elders here. And I'm one of those too, and that's okay. But I just came, Sue and I came in May from the Festival of Radical Discipleship at the Kirkridge Retreat Center in Pennsylvania. I don't think any of you that I'm seeing were there. But it was an amazing gathering, and Chad and Elaine were passing on the tradition that they had going from their place in Ventura to Lydia and Bill Wiley Kellerman, and I'm sure you all know Bill Wiley Kellerman over the decades, at Kirkridge. And one of the things that they did was provide a wonderful, lengthy genealogy of this movement, of the movement of nonviolence in the church and beyond. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful time to recognize that even though we're old people, there were people before us. And now I think our task is to make sure that it's passed on to the people below us, so to speak, who, as we know, are mostly turned off by Christianity, turned off by religion, not interested in the Bible, and as a result, have no real direction on what to do in the situation we're in. And obviously, it doesn't work to say, you should read the Bible. Well, they've been hearing that, and that doesn't work. So we all need to be more creative, listen to the Spirit here for how to animate this story that I assume you love as much as I do, or something like that, or you wouldn't be here on a Saturday. You could be doing anything else. So I want to just be grateful for those who've gone before us and for all of you, and just hope and pray that that spirit can continue to pass into the wider world, so this movement can just keep going. Um, and I find myself, it's 16 years since the book that John raised up was published, 20 years since I first wrote the first section of it. And I would do it very differently now, only because my experience in doing this work for almost 4 decades now is this little mantra that Sue and I use: there's always more. You think you've seen a text and you think you know it, but there's more. And I want to highlight that because one of the key points that I want to make today, and it's almost at the root of everything, not everything, but a lot. And this may seem obscure, but stay with me for a minute, is the difference between how Hebrew works and how Greek works as languages. And to put that briefly, Hebrew, from the beginning, by the very nature of it, is intentionally ambiguous. Hebrew words, as I'm sure many of you know, have no vowels, they have no punctuation, they have no capitalization, they have no spaces between words. Try to read an English sentence, without all that. It's very difficult. Where does one word start and where does another word end? Especially if there's no vowels, right? So many things can happen. And that was done on purpose, because the biblical sense, the Hebrew, Jewish, Israelite sense of words is they're playful things to point us toward beyond themselves to other things, most importantly, God, but not just that. Whereas the Greek philosophers had almost the exact opposite view. And curiously, historically, Hebrew was the first alphabet and Greek was the second, right? Alphabet, right? Aleph, bet, alpha, beta. And the Greek sense of language was words are precise containers of meaning. So it's important to have the right words. It's possible to have the right words. It's essential to have the right words. And so one of the things that happened when Greek-speaking philosophers found the Hebrew Bible is they wanted to tame it into something that was fixed in place, but it couldn't be, because on its surface, it was full of all this ambiguity and gaps and spaces and all kinds of things. So they allegorized it. They made it about the one thing that they thought was important: the individual soul and its relationship to God. Systematically, they thought religion and the Bible were not about economics, politics, relationships with the earth or other people, or any of those things. And I'm sure you can feel and hear the echoes of that tradition 2,000 years later. So I'm kind of starting from the end there at one level, but I just want to highlight that the language of the Hebrew Bible is meant to be playful. We're meant to play in it. This is meant to be an enjoyable thing, engaging in the word. One of my favorite rabbinical stories is of a rabbi whose 3 students came to him in the morning, and they found him deep in prayer and study of a passage. They didn't want to bother him. And so they came back the next day, and there he was with a scroll open to the same passage. And they thought, that's strange. He usually goes through them. And the third day, the same. And so they finally asked him, Rabbi, why are you on the same passage 3 days in a row? And he looked up at them a little bit hurt and said, I'm finding the Holy One so present in this passage. Why should I go on to another one? So there's a well here that we've barely tapped into. You know, in our instrumental culture, it's like, what's the point? You know, yeah, I read John's Gospel. Now I got to read something else, right? We watched that TV show, read that book. Now novelty, newness, on to the next thing, accumulating, right? We accumulate information the way we accumulate things. But it's not about accumulation. It's about presence, being with. And somebody's outside my car here, so they're not talking to me. So sorry if you hear there's noise in the background. So my sense of that is the Hebrew scriptures were intended to be entered into so they can enter into us in a mutual penetration from the past to the present to the future. And the creators of those stories, all of whom were Israelites or Jews, none of whom were Christians, not one word of the Bible was written by anybody who claimed to be a Christian, nor was it written for people who claimed to be Christians, decided it was important to do something which we find incredibly difficult to do in this moment, which was to include both sides of the argument, to include their own views and the views of the people they radically disagreed with, and put them all together and say to their children and their children's children, you work it out now. It's your turn to grapple with this. We're not giving you answers. We're telling you the stories of our experience and our ancestors, and now we're leaving it to you, trusting that you and your integrity and God present with you don't need us to tell you what it means, but you can enter into it and discover it for yourself, which is one reason why Jewish tradition has never had, since the temple was destroyed, a hierarchy, right? There's no pope, there's no bishops, there's nobody to say, this is the right answer, and if you don't agree, you're out. People argue about it, but then they go on. You know, famous story from the Holocaust of oh God, what's his name? I'm forgetting, his name is slipping me, but the major Holocaust writer who talked about putting God on trial in the concentration camps and finding God guilty for the Holocaust and then going back to prayer. Right? Just because you find God guilty for doing something horrible doesn't mean you stop the relationship. You know, that's faith to me. Trusting that you screwed up with us, God, you messed this up, but we're still with you. Like in a marriage, huh? Or your kids or whatever it be, that, you know, you have fights. Sometimes you have to move on, but often you say, okay, let's find the path to peace from that broken place. So that's one of the beautiful things for me. And the other beautiful thing I want to say is, until the modern state of Israel, just think about this for 1 second. There has never been an independent polity of Jews that did not suffer under oppression. Never in history. Whether it's their own kings, as I was saying before we started, Egyptian colonial plants like Solomon and his successors, but then Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, and then Christians, and more Romans, etc. So these stories were written by people who never had real power and grappled with what that is to have power. Is it a good thing or a bad thing to have worldly power? And they told amazing stories that don't have answers, but invite us to grapple with them. So that's just a starting point for a little context. One other thing to start with is this term religion. The first sentence of the book is, there is not now, nor has there ever been such a thing as Judaism or Christianity. And at one level, that sounds like a stupid sentence. What of course there is. But what I mean by that is, both those terms, Judaism and Christianity, are too broad labels to tell you what anybody who claims them believes or how they act. Jews, as we know, exist from the spectrum of the ultra-Orthodox who think Netanyahu's too liberal, to the voices, Jewish voices for peace in the streets, etc. And we know the same with Christians, from John Deere and the Berrigans to the people who support Trump. So they're not John Deere and the people that support Trump are plainly not practicing the same religion, not bound together by the same principles, same narratives, same practices. So we need new terms. And I know John and I have gone back over the decades around nonviolence language and love language and such. One reason I didn't say, by the way, the religion of love, John, you'll note that. One reason I chose creation empire rather than say nonviolence and peace is nonviolence and peace are ideas. Empire's a structure of reality out there. And creation's a structure of reality. So I'm trying to refer to the ways we think, believe, and act that support one of two structures of reality, an imperial structure or God's creation. And they're largely mutually exclusive, as we know. When the Europeans Christians saw the forests of Pennsylvania and Ohio, they thought they were infested by demons, and their impulse was to chop them all down. They didn't see them as sacred places where you could experience creation and God and your harmony with all the other creatures. They saw them as evil places of darkness. And they turned a forest at Ohio into railroad ties. Saw that as their divine mission, to clear the land. And I don't need to belabor the point. We know about bison, its beavers, etc. That's the function of religion of empire. And the root I want to highlight is the root of the religion of empire, which is ubiquitous around the world throughout history, is fear. It's an approach to life that is, I'm afraid. I'm afraid of you. I don't know who you are. I'm afraid of new places. I've never been here before. I'm afraid of new ideas. I'm afraid there's not enough. I'm afraid of dying. I'm just afraid. So I want to be safe. I need somebody to keep me safe. I'll trade everything for safety. 30 years ago, almost 40 now, when I was first invited to participate at the Bangor submarine base outside of Seattle area, with the tutelage of Jim and Shelley Douglas. And if you don't know, Jim Douglas has a new book coming out at age 88, which John and I were just talking about finally. One of the things I experienced there was the ambiguity of how people would behave toward a Trident submarine. Should we be fighting it? Should we sit in front of it? What do you do in the face of the enormity of that kind of thing? And Jim gathered and Shelley gathered a collection of people that included Buddhist monks, Jewish rabbis, Archbishop Hunthouse, and young people who probably had no religion, and gathered them all together to combat the fear that was expressed in the Trident submarine. And I spent a lot of time listening to the experts who explained the technicalities of Trident submarine. Some of you may know the great work of Robert Aldrich, a Lockheed designer who then turned on the Trident and talked about it. And I learned about throwaways and all those kinds of things. But I honestly never found anybody who was changed, their heart was changed, their mind was changed by telling them how destructive a nuclear weapon could be. Because my conclusion was nuclear weapons are a nightlight against fear of the dark. The basic fear of the dark. And even though the Soviet Union's been gone for decades, the Trident submarine's still out there. They're still in Bangor. They're still in Florida and Alabama. They're still out in the ocean because we're still afraid of whatever. We're just afraid. And we don't need to be afraid because the most common repeated commandment in the Bible by far is do not be afraid. But we also know you can't command people that. If somebody's scared, if they're depressed, you can't just say, stop being depressed. That doesn't help. You have to ask, why are you afraid? What are you afraid of? What would happen if you confronted this? And in my experience and Sue's experience in ministry, and Sue is a spiritual director, that fear is rooted in its most deepest place is I'm not good enough. I'm not loved. I'm not enough. And so the root of any of this, and I wish Sue was here for this too. We're better when we're together, but maybe another time, John. As Henry Nouwen certainly understood, is we have to have that experience of the prodigal son. We have to have the experience of Jesus in the wilderness, of the divine voice saying, I love you. Not because of anything. Not because of anything. Just, I do. It's just who I am. It's just love flows from me to you. Can you feel it? Do you know it? Can you build your foundation of your life on that? Because nothing else will work. Nothing. And I'm sure some of us out here have tried other things, financial security, intellectual acumen, whatever it might be. None of those work. Only knowing that we're loved by the Creator, as far as I've experienced in my 7 decades of life on this planet. And many of my Israelite ancestors also understood that, right? Because if you read Genesis 1 taken seriously would change everything, right? Genesis 1 would change everything. All of creation is good. And it's good before humans are made. It's good apart from us. It's good independent of us. It's not good because of us. It's not good for us. It's just good in itself. And then we're made in the image and likeness of the Creator. That's one of the most amazing insights any human being ever came up with, as far as I can say. What a thing that is, to say that when you see a human being in their true self, you are seeing God. And it doesn't just apply to Jesus. It's just that Jesus understood it and lived it. It applies to all of us. We are all meant to be living icons of the divine. That's the message of the prologue of John. To those who trusted in him, he gave power to become children of God, which is a collective form of saying sons and daughters, or whatever words for siblings we have these days of God. Offspring, right? That's our foundational call in the religion of creation. And it doesn't call for a creed. It doesn't call for any statement of belief. It doesn't matter if you're a Jew, a Christian, a Buddhist, or whatever. If you know in the heart of your being, in every cell, that love is what's flowing through you and holding the universe together, you've got it. You've got it. And the rest is just stories to share to help articulate that and know, do you have it, Ruth Ann? And do you have it, Paul? And, the stories give us something common to work with. Another one that's similar like that, Exodus 3. What an amazing story that is. There's Moses in the witness protection program, hiding from the folks in Egypt, out there being a shepherd there for the Midianites. Your Bible might not say witness protection program, but anyway. And he has this experience. He's not looking for God. He's not looking to be a liberator. He's trying to stay out of the way. He has this experience of a piece of creation just lit up so brightly, it's like it's on fire. And when he goes to it, and he hears the voice that says, you are on holy ground. And I'd like to suggest not that square foot or square cubit, just earth. Earth is holy ground. All of it, every inch of it is holy ground, because it's part of the Creator's gift to us. And when Moses rightly, understandably says, you're sending me on a suicide mission and nobody's going to believe me, and this whole thing is stupid, at least I need to know a name. You give me a name I can give them. And the name he gets, of course, is I am. Ha! Ha! I am. Isn't that a name? It's a statement of being, It's sometimes translated, I am who is, I am the one who is. Okay, we can play with that. In John's gospel, Jesus simply says, I am. And you know who else says I am in John's gospel? The man born blind. Ego eimi in the Greek. He says it, which is the point that I was making earlier about all of us. He comes to trust in Jesus, and he doesn't know he's saying I am, that's echoing Exodus 3 and Genesis 1. He doesn't know all that stuff. He doesn't have to. But he knows that in speaking up and claiming I am, he's no longer afraid that these people are going to do bad things to me if I testify for Jesus. And they do bad things to him. They kick him out. And you know what happens when he gets out. Jesus finds him and welcomes him into a new community. So that the religion of creation story, those two examples, give us a way from birth to death, really, to live in harmony with ourselves, first of all, and the universe that is us, right? Because we're not just us, we're a universe of bacteria and carriers of all kinds of creatures, right? There are more bacteria in my body than humans on the planet, right? I mean, we are a universe, each of us. So we're responsible for how we treat our own universe as sacred and holy, how we treat those around us, humans, birds, flowers, worms, as sacred and holy. And hardest of all, it seems, our fellow humans who may have different ideas than us about things, may have acted in ways that we find abhorrent. Well, as John likes to say, a great opportunity to love your enemies, huh? Those people we find most despicable are the ones that are most important. So, in the Bible, we see these stories not just as a collection, over here's the religion of creation, over here's the religion of empire. That's a little bit of the false dichotomy that some Christians have around there's the Old Testament and the New Testament, which if it was for me to do, I would just erase that line and say there's a collection of stories. Some of those stories are about Jesus, but they're all written by Jews for themselves. So I'm not sure why the Jesus stories are set out separately. But be that as it may, they contain stories and counter stories. So two primary examples, and I'll do this in a rough sketch, but feel free to jump in and interrupt with questions or clarifications. I've heard myself say this before, but I don't know all of you. So if some of you want to get me to say something I wasn't already thinking of saying, please jump in. But two examples. In the monarchy story, we hear that God has given authority, Yahweh has given authority first to Saul, then to David to be kings. Not without a warning about this is what kings are going to do. They're going to take. There it is in 1 Samuel 8, 6 times in verses 11 to 17. They're going to take your sons, they're going to take your daughters, they're going to take your land, they're going to take your crops, they're going to take your animals, and then you're going to cry out to Yahweh, and Yahweh will not answer on that day. You made your choice. You got to live with it. And they purport to say that Yahweh is on the side of this monarchy project. Now, as I was saying at the beginning in my videos and Radical Bible on the books of Samuel, I'm finding there's more ambiguity there than you might think. They're more ambivalent about David than one might think. But there's a rebellion. You may well know the monarchy story. So after Solomon's wisdom, Solomon has the wisdom to know how to hold a subject people in thrall. That's his wisdom. How to keep Israel from rebelling. How to tax them, but not tax them so much that they say, screw it. We got nothing to lose anymore. But his son isn't that smart, right? And it's a great, people know the story of Rehoboam and the elders. This is a great biblical story. You don't hear this one at church. But there it is in 1 Kings. So the moment Solomon is dead, the narrator has said, under Solomon, everybody, all Israel lived happy, and under their vine and fig tree, and everybody was happy. Okay. But the text then says, the moment Solomon's dead, the elders of Israel came to Rehoboam, his son, and said, your father was harsh on us. First thing they say, it was not all sunshine. Your father was a slave-running tyrant. And if you loosen up the yoke, we'll serve you. And he goes to the elders and they say, that's good advice. Loosen up and serve them. And he goes to his peers, the young bucks who are like him. And they say, tell them this, my little one is thicker than my father's loins. I'm not making this up. That's in the Bible. You know, penis size comparison, 3,000 years ago. Look it up. I'm not making this up. And so Rehoboam says that to them, and they say, to your tents, O Israel, to your tents. To your tents. Back to the primal home. Back to where we were in the Exodus. But the monarchy story doesn't know the Exodus because the Exodus story was written as a counter story to the monarchy story, where the three kings, David, Solomon, Rehoboam, are symbolized by three anonymous pharaohs. The Pharaoh who knew Joseph, the Pharaoh who puts the baby boys in the river, and then the Pharaoh who's there when Moses comes back from Midian, representing those three kings. And in the Exodus story, we hear the theology that God is on the side of people who rebel against tyrant kings. God will be with you when you resist the rule of kings. Opposite stories, right? One claiming that these kings serve Yahweh, and one claiming that the rebels are serving Yahweh. But even the monarchy story knows that, because what is Absalom's basis for his rebellion? He goes out into the street and says, I'll give you justice. And all Israel comes to Absalom. Now, he's doing a politician's promise. He's promising everybody justice. If they bring a lawsuit, I'll give everybody what they want. That didn't quite work that way, but it works for politicians so often, doesn't it? And he goes in around kissing babies and, gathering constituency, because there's a real need. Just like today, Trump was addressing a real need. The working class have been screwed. No question about that, right? The working class is screwed. The middle class is increasingly screwed. Can't afford housing, working 3 jobs, can't afford childcare. I don't need to tell you. Trump's not the solution, and Absalom wasn't the solution. But they recognized the existing system was not it either. There was something really wrong that these misguided, egotistical people, Absalom and Trump, could turn into something for their own benefit. But in Exodus, it's not about Moses having power. Right? When they stand there and the Egyptians are coming, what is Yahweh's instruction to Moses? Just stand still and I'll take care of it. He doesn't order the Israelites to have their own army and take them on. He just says, just get out of the way. And how is it taken care of? It's portrayed in sort of a magical realism sort of way to make it a good story. But I'd like to suggest, and I'm not the first one to suggest this by a long shot, that it's creation coming back against the unsustainability of slave-based agriculture, as it does everywhere it takes place. After all, the deserts of Iraq used to be fertile agriculture. That's what made Babylon an empire, right? You get slaves that dig canals around the Tigris and Euphrates, and you get them out in the hot sun, keeping the canals and planting stuff. But if you do that too intensively, you hit the salt layer, and there goes your soil forever, right? And in the Midwest of the United States, when the white people first came, there were 200 feet of topsoil. Now there's less than 15 feet in most places. So that apocalypse is about upon us. The revelation, I mean it in that literal sense, that what we do to produce food is utterly unsustainable. Imperial foodways are not sustainable. What's the religion of creation way of eating food? Find it. It's all over. It's everywhere. There's more than you can eat. Everywhere, all around you. Well, maybe not where you live, because empire has colonized it and destroyed it and paved over it. But as the old Talking Heads song once said, that was a Dairy Queen, and now it's all covered with flowers. Not because people tore it down, just because people got out of the way and let creation re-exert. Or as Lenny Bruce once said in a beautiful thing in his talk at Carnegie Hall, quoting the song Spanish Harlem, "There's a rose so sweet, it grows through the crack in the concrete." Right? Creation does not quit. God does not quit. Empires quit. They give up. They fall. They have 100% failure rate. And we still are in the illusion. Let's try again. Maybe it'll be different this time. Okay. So far, so good. Another story, another biblical story. The exile. The exile was an event that most of us can't imagine. Some of you are not in white controlled places like I am. And so some of you, perhaps in Africa or South America, can understand it more than I can. But the exile seemed to be the end of everything. If our God was protecting us, how the hell did this happen? What happened? And they could have said, Yahweh wasn't as strong as Marduk. That's why we should worship Marduk now. And maybe some probably did believe that. Or Yahweh turned from us, abandoned us. Some, I'm sure, thought that. But some decided maybe it was our fault. Maybe it wasn't God's fault. Maybe it was our fault. And the Bible contains several answers to that question. Genesis's answer to the question is the problem was civilization. Shouldn't have done that. Meaning focusing life around cities, human infrastructure built on top of creation. Should have just left creation the way it is. Not like a museum, not like something to observe, but as almost all indigenous peoples do, as we know, in harmony with it, receiving it as gift, returning to it when we can, treating soil as a living being that needs to be fed so it can feed us, right? Honoring the creatures who give their lives so we can eat, whether it's a carrot or a cow. If we eat cows, as an abundant gift. But other texts see it differently. So the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, which won the battle on the ground, so to speak, reached this conclusion. The reason the exile happened is we Judahite men married foreign women and they led us astray. Both xenophobic and sexist in the same sentence. Impressive, isn't it? And their solution, it wasn't just ideological, their solution was to say to the men, if you want to be part of the restored community, you must send away your women and children. And I was doing a version of this to a Church of All Nations in Minneapolis, a wonderful community. Boy, if you don't know them, they're doing incredible work there in Minneapolis. And one of them said to me with great anguish, what did that mean for the women and children? I said, it meant death. That's what it meant. Where was there to go? It's not like go to the next town. It meant leave. That's what they understood Yahweh was commanding them to do. And it comes out of the same tradition as Deuteronomy 7, which comes right after the beautiful chapter of Deuteronomy 6, the Shema, love God with all your mind, heart, and strength. And then there's chapter 7. I'm bringing you into this land, and your job is to clear away all the peoples in that land, or I will destroy you. That's as pure a statement of the religion of empire as there is anywhere in the Bible, right? I am a destroyer, God says, and you either destroy them in my name, or I will destroy you. Okay. Jesus says no to that, but also writers at the time said no to that. A prophet whose words are in the last chapter of Isaiah say that. They say, for example, in Isaiah 56, do not let the foreigner who's joined to Yahweh say, I will be rejected because I'm a foreigner. And that's the passage that leads to, my temple should be a house of prayer for all people, which Jesus, of course, quotes. Not just for the Israelites, but for all people. That the Creator is a gathering point for everybody, wherever, not just in Jerusalem. Because one of the, the wonderful subversive things about the New Testament that way is the house of God is no longer a building, it's now a person. And not just Jesus, but us. Paul uses that language, right? The body of Christ. We are a body, a living body with many parts that must work together. And that's so religion of creation, right? That I can't separate out the suffering happening to somebody else from the suffering happening to me, because we're one body. It's not just a metaphor. It's a physical fact on this earth, right? Where Earth is a more or less closed system, not completely closed system. We get meteorites and, things, but it's basically a closed system, and we're all in it together. When Bill McKibben wrote The End of Nature decades ago, He wasn't saying that nature will disappear. He's saying the concept of nature as a separate realm must go. There is no separate realm. It's all nature. There's nothing else. Even civilization is nature in the sense that concrete comes from the earth. It's not from somewhere else. Maybe some of you know the wonderful indigenous writer Tommy Orange, a recent book, Wandering Stars, and his work on indigenous people, which he is, of course, is on urban. He calls them urban Indians, and he says some people criticize me because don't Indians live on the reservation? If you live in a city, you're no longer an Indian. He said we live on the earth, and the cities are as much the earth as the reservation is. Oh, plastic is as much from the earth as an organic material once upon a time, right? Plastic came from living beings. We call them fossil fuels, after all. You know? So from that progressive creation perspective, everybody's welcome because we're one body. And Jesus enters into that argument. In his time, as we know, the Romans were the empire who claimed the gods have given us the authority and you have to serve us. And some went along with that, as we know. The Sanhedrin was like any colonial council. You know, we'll give you some power and you get the people to cooperate with us. We see the same thing in the original, back in the day, right? When Ezekiel criticizes the shepherds for getting fat off the sheep, you know, while the sheep are suffering. So the prophets have long castigated the leaders for being in bed with the oppressors rather than with the people they're supposed to be responsible for. What's new there? All right. But Jesus takes it a step further. He knows that you can't leave empire the way the Israelites could leave Egypt. You can't get up and go somewhere in that sense. There's not like open space that you can all go find a new space. That's, of course, the tragedy of the 20th century creation of the Israelite nation state, which was doomed to lead us right where we are because it was somebody else's land and there was no place to put the Jews that somebody else wouldn't say, hey, wait, we were already here. No. So we can't do that. We can't come out literally by going somewhere. That was the monastic impulse, you know, in the first centuries after Constantine, which were largely still religion of empire, mostly. I talk about that more in my book, Empire Baptized. I don't need to get into that too much today. They were doing good things. They lived simply, but they were also supportive of doctrine and denying of the body and denying of sexuality and those kinds of things. But Jesus embraced all that and said, we can come out where we are. I forget who said this. I think it's one of your friends, John, who you've interviewed. It was Elizabeth Johnson or somebody like that, who talked about reclaiming the word being defective. We are defective, like not in the sense of broken, but in the sense of defecting, refusing to abide by the current paradigm. Dissenters, you know, we're not going to be a part of this. So for those of us who are defective, how do we do that? Well, I don't think you'll find a better practical place than the messages to the ecclesia in Revelation 2 and 3. And just a couple brief things about that. So John, who's speaking to them, and I did another podcast with our John here about that. So, and there's another book about that too, but if you want books. But he says, I'm your brother. I'm not any different than you. I'm just one of you. And I was on this island and I was given this vision. And I was told to write it down and send it to the angels of your communities. And so I'm doing it. And here it is. A couple things about that. They are brilliant examples of deep spiritual direction. Just brilliant. It says, I see you. I see you exactly. You're not hiding from me, you communities. I see what you're doing great. I see where you're faithful, and I see where your fear has overcome you. So, for example, I see those who are a synagogue of Satan say they are Jews but are not. And what he's referring to there are people who are one of two possibilities. Either people like Paul, who see this movement as subversive and needing to be stopped, Or the other way around, as Jesus followers who are afraid of being outed as Jesus followers because that'll get them bad with the empire. And so they want to hide in the synagogue under the cover of the synagogue. And the call is to come out. So in that message, he goes on to say to them, I know this is what's happening, but you don't associate with those people. You're not being drawn in by that. He tells them what they're doing right. He tells them what's not. And every community hears what's being said to all the others because they're in it together. They're this little necklace of communities in the province of Asia meant to be mutual support communities. Like when Jesus says in the Last Supper discourse, in my Father's house, there are many dwelling places. And in the context of John's gospel, we can hear that as all these little places where disciples of Jesus are welcome. It's not about the afterlife. It's about here and now, that you, Jesus followers, will find you're not alone and you're not the only little circle of people like this. When you travel around the Mediterranean, you will find other circles like this. Believe me, Jesus says, you are not alone. There are more people like you, and you need to support each other. If they're in financial need, as Paul says, you need to help them. And if you're in financial need, don't be proud, call on them and they will help you. And it'll flow. As my dear friend Liz down there has learned so much about how money flows. And we learned as much from Chad and Tevin East and her beautiful choreographed dance, where she shows how water, like money, stored up, gets stagnant. But when it flows, it's life. So money being held in a bank is anti-life. Money that flows between us is a vehicle where life can be facilitated, especially since money is not real. It's just an idea we have. There's no such thing as money, right? It's just our commitment to have something of what we have flow to someone who has something else. So he gives us the tools for not building the kingdom of God. In all the years I was involved in Catholic churches, and I'm not anymore, when that song came up, it's a St. Louis Jesuits, it's a nice song, but I thought they missed the point. The kingdom of God is not a human building project. It's civilization that's the human building project. The kingdom of God is here. It's just here. It's in us, among us. We know that, right? It's just look around you. Look inside you. There it is, right? It's just, nobody's going to say it's there, it's here, it's everywhere. You can't point to it. It's like telling a fish, where's the water? What do you mean, where's the water? But we have to recognize it and we have to live into the fullness of that. And that's what the work of people like John have so passionately proclaimed and embodied so many years. One of the things I love about you, John, you pitched me for a while. Let me pitch you for a minute. John does something that very few scholarly sort of people do. He practices what he preaches. Isn't that something? He goes to jail. He goes to places of poverty. He was a young Jesuit getting shot at in El Salvador, learning from the Jesuits there. He practices it. And I'm sure you do too. I'm sure I'm sitting in a sea of wonderful witnesses who've gone to jail and fed the hungry and made all kinds of wonderful gestures and lives for that. So don't think you need conversion here, other than the fact that we all do. Always, right? So in Luke's gospel, Jesus tells us two things daily. Turn to God for food and pick up your cross, right? What's that mean? Well, we probably can't just walk around and pick food, although where I live in Issaquah, Washington, 15 miles east of Seattle, right next to a mountain called Tiger Mountain, there are 200 species of edible plants there. I know about 20 or 30 of them because I don't have to, right? Because I've got Safeway. But to the extent that we can increasingly learn what's there, help make what could be there grow there. Not talking about agriculture. Agriculture is just another form of human control, of controlling the fertility of the earth for our benefit. It's one of the roots of our problem. It's what makes slave-based civilization possible. But as I'm sure many of you know, many Catholic workers involved in permaculture, right? Rearranging things in the natural order so that energy, sun, water, wind flow from abundance to need. and indigenous peoples know that we can learn how to restore our relationship with creation, and we can learn how to restore our relationships with each other. So something that Liz has sometimes been a part of, and that I'm a part of in Issaquah, where there's not a lot of obvious poverty, there is in some places, we have a lunch we serve every week. We're in our 18th year serving it. And beloved Edward Loring, as many of you I'm sure know from the Open Door community, came out with his beloved sainted wife, Murphy, Presente Murphy, and spoke to us. And they made a very important point that I've never forgotten. I say every chance I can, like right here. We are not serving that meal to benefit the poor. We are serving the meal so that we have an opportunity to be in the presence of the poor and learn from them. Right? It's St. Vincent de Paul who famously said, may the poor forgive us the bread we give them. Right? So for all those years that I make coffee and serve clam chowder, and other people make salads and sandwiches, and an incredible meal, come sometime. It's the best free meal around anywhere. But it gives me a chance to hear how empire affects people like my friend Felix, an undocumented Mexican that I've had lunch with almost every week for 17 years. Now, there's nobody else. My friends I have lunch with once every few months. Hey, let's have lunch, right? I have lunch with Felix every week. He's not a drug addict. He's not mentally ill. He's very bright. He's very articulate. He speaks 3 languages, but he's undocumented. So he's homeless. Hasn't seen his mother in Mexico in 20-something years. He's afraid to go back, understandably. That's the price of empire, right? I'm sure you have your own stories, but I wouldn't know that story unless it was Felix, right? I can read about undocumented farm workers, ice raids. It's abstract, but Felix makes it real and personal for me. And that's what Jesus does, right? He doesn't talk about the poor in the abstract. He says to Simon the Pharisee, when the woman is anointing his feet, do you see this woman? This woman right here, right in your room. Do you see her? No, he doesn't. What he sees is a sinner. He doesn't see her. So Jesus calls us to see people by being present with them. My wife, Sue, is so gifted at this, and she's taught me this quick story, and then I think I'll about ready to stop. It's been an hour, John. Not quite by the time you did prayer. When she first moved here from Iowa, I had been part of a group called the Eutychus community. Maybe you know Eutychus in Acts of the Apostles, where Paul is speaking and he falls asleep and falls out the window, and Paul says, he's still alive, I can keep talking. I love that story. We're the Eutychus community, and she'd never met these people. And after we had a 2-hour session of prayer and discussion, etc., and she asked me about one of the people, and she said, how badly was he abused as a child? I went, what? And I said, how badly was he sexually abused as a child? I said, how do you know that? She said, I could see him. I went, what? This is 20 years ago. It was new to me. She said, I could see him. And I realized Sue sees people. She sees the whole person. She doesn't always say it because it's disturbing to have people be seen that way, to recognize that they're more transparent than they thought they were. But I've seen it multiple times. I could tell more stories. I'm sure Liz could tell stories. Weldon could tell stories about Sue. And she says, I say to Sue, you have a great gift. She said, I don't have a gift. It's just love. It's just practicing love. And I'm slowly coming to believe her. It's been 20 years we've been together as married, 25 in ministry. I'm slowly coming to believe that maybe it's not a special gift. Maybe it's just that she's more in tune with that river of love than I am, who so easily, as a male guy formed in our culture, in that world of ideas in my head where I can dance around with words and biblical texts and not necessarily see Paul and Ruth Ann and Lynn and Frank and George who you are. You're just faces in a Zoom box, right? It's almost impossible. But this is what we have to do in the moment we're in. So I hope that provides some both reinforcement for what I trust you already believe and practice, that I'm not talking to a bunch of rookies here, but also perhaps a little more spirit to animate your own engagement, because it's lifelong, right? We're never there. We never know it all. That's what Peter and the folks want to do on the mountain of Transfiguration. Let's build 3 booths and stay here. It's messy down below. There are people that are possessed, crowds yelling at us. No, we got to go down there. You got to get into the muck. You can't just hide up here. Retreats are great, but then you got to go back into the muck. or they're going to hate you or love you or ignore you. Amen.
Well, thank you so much, Wes. And I'm so glad everybody was here to get a flavor of Wes, his brilliance, and where he's coming from with his book projects and this masterpiece. Basically, he's saying that we've got these two, he's offering this language
I
in
like
a
you
way that
translating it for it, but I just said
I'm
that.
explaining it to them. And then I have two questions for you. And I want to hear questions from everybody else. And if you're not going to write them in, I'm going to call on folks. But just to say it again, religion of empire or religion of creation. And it's so simple. And we're all stuck in empire and death. And it's in a million trillion different ways. And we're being called out of that. And that's what I found so persuasive. Now, when I first read your book, what I've remembered, and I'm so glad you brought it up, and is that the life on the land, which you talked about, permaculture. I won't use the word agriculture. So that the story in the first part of the Bible, and I just see if I got it right, Wes, is the Garden of Eden. God is there, life, it's peace, it's love, and what happens? Consumerism and murder. And so Cain kills Abel and Cain moves away. And it's long story short, you got the Tower of Babel, you've got cities and then empires and then weapons, and people are no longer living on the land. And then it's slavery and domination and war.
Yep.
So is that true, the way you of the beginning of the Bible? And the second question was, can you say a word? I mean, the way I always looked at the whole length of the Bible is, the early Torah, this early story, and then the wisdom literature, where there was a little something different happening. And I think it was the feminine image of God to the prophetic nature, which was really denouncing empire, but couldn't quite get rid of violence. And it's in Jesus that we get to this really radical fullness of the religion of creation. Is that okay too?
Well, the only challenge to that is, and it's too complicated to get into now, but I do in the book, is that the Bible was not written in the order that we have it. So the challenge is asking the question of what the actual historical sequence of people was is a different question than asking what's the narrative if we start with Genesis and just work our way through. As I was suggesting earlier, Genesis is almost certainly an exilic or post-exilic text. God was not known as the creator till after exile because it wasn't necessary theologically. Exile pushed them to say, our God, if we're going to believe in this God, our God has to be more than just the God of this place. So they moved from henotheism to monotheism. And there's a price for that. It's the suppression of the sacred feminine. That's a whole other topic. It's an important topic, but it's a whole other topic. But certainly Genesis 1 to 11 tells in incredible language, the whole journey, as you're saying. I mean, Cain, the first city is made by the first murderer. A etching that's up at the LA Catholic Worker and has been for decades, right, Mike? I know that one on the stairway landing. I can picture it now. And Cain chooses to turn away. God doesn't send him away. Cain went away from the presence of Yahweh and built a city. So from the beginning, Genesis is saying the city was a rebellion against God. The Babylonian story says the opposite. Babylonian says the city is the embodiment of the home of God, right? So it goes both ways. I've seen a couple other questions and I didn't look at them. I don't know if I full answered yours, but I saw Weldon had a question, but they slide by and I don't see them. So maybe those of you who have questions can just say them. So
Well, go ahead, Weldon.
Thank you so much, Wes. I really appreciate your beginning with Hebrew and Greek and talking about story and counter story. I have a question about you didn't mention truth, and I've often said in my presentations that we live in a post-truth time because the narratives become whatever we say it is. Is there ultimate truth, biblical truth, multiple truths that as you work with the Hebrew and Greek and the
yes,
biblical narrative?
yes, but
how
not
do
in
we?
words. Yes,
Yeah,
but not in words.
Say more.
No.
Okay.
Right? Because
Yeah.
I'm just playing with you. But seriously, the words at best are iconic. Like if we're looking at a beautiful sunset together, how do words help us? We see it together. Well, it's
Mhm.
pretty, isn't it? That doesn't help.
Yeah.
Can we scientifically describe the color range? That doesn't help. Just words fail.
Yeah.
You know, how often do we say I love you knowing that's not nearly expressing what's going on here?
Yeah.
You know, and the Israelites knew that. They knew that words were limited vessels. God creates through the words, and yet they're always slippery and have multiple meanings. And they just embraced that rather than fight. The Greeks fought against it, and the Israelites embraced it. You know, and that's just part of our own thing. Do we, in our own lives, apart from language, are we comfortable with ambiguity, or does ambiguity make us anxious? I need to know the answer. I need to know what I'm supposed to do. What does God want me to do? What's going to happen? Can you feel the anxiety of, the unknown? But if we trust in the Creator, there's nothing to be anxious about. It's all good. All things are well, and all manners of things are well. I didn't make that up. So, so the truth that's there is experienced, but it's not reduced to words. The Greeks tried to do that, and look what it did. It cost them 200 years of fighting over iota, right? Literally, over homoousios versus homoiousios. It's just so absurd. It accomplished nothing. And I
Liz
would
has a
suggest,
question.
while you're on that, let me just suggest something of chastise the left for this too. Because historically, heresy hunting has been a function of the religion of empire. Constantine said, give me a creed and I'll enforce it. But my experience is the left and the church left mostly are feeling so disempowered to be effective in the world that they've turned to policing their own verbally as a substitute. And so we police language, and it's turned off everybody else. And it's accomplished almost nothing. It's not to say if some of the language arguments aren't valid. At some level they are. But they don't get to the real issues. The real issues here are not about the words. The real issues are about the actions. It's not true that sticks and stones will break my bones and words don't hurt people. Obviously, if I use the N word to somebody, that's hurtful. If people say racist or anti-Semitic things, it's hurtful. But then I can get up and walk away. It's not the same as taking my land, It's not the same as shooting me. So words need to be paid attention to, but they're not the ultimate arbiters of peace and justice. They're just pointers along the way, and the truth, we know it. Weldon, I know you well enough that I know you know what's true and real, but I don't need you to put it in words for me to know that, because I know you, because we've journeyed together for years, decades now. And I've seen your life. And the same with John, same way. I've known John over the years and decades. And I know that John knows the same truth I know. I don't need him to say it in words and have us agree. Write a poem or something, And that's what's so beautiful about the Bible. New Testament, Gospel of John is poetry. It's all poetry. Unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you'll have no life in you. Try to make rational sense out of that, people. That's poetry. The Bible's full of poetry. Even the things we don't think are poetry are poetic, in the sense that they're using words to point at things.
Okay, Wes, Liz has a question for you. Liz, why don't you go unmute yourself and give us your question about it?
All my friends are here. I want to hear from you, Liz, but I want to hear from other people I don't know yet, too,
Well,
please.
there are other questions in the chat also. Well, even before you used the word the divine feminine, I had typed into the chat this question.
I saw it.
Oh, great.
That's why I said it.
Could you name something? Thank you.
A book?
A book or an author?
There's so many. John, you've interviewed and know more feminist theologians. You have a quicker grip on that than I would. Elizabeth Johnson?
Well, anything by Elizabeth Johnson is you've got to read. But then, of course, Rosemary Radford Ruther and Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza are the great.
Yeah, Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza, of course, who's still alive, amazingly.
Thank you, Father John. You said them so quickly, I didn't catch them. Could I be so bold as to ask you to type them in the chat?
How do I do that?
Oh,
Click
to
on
where it says
chat.
message.
Click on chat
and
button.
type, John. Just
Okay.
click on chat.
I will try. Yes. But Elizabeth Johnson's book, She Who Is,
Yeah.
thank you.
is her best-selling book, and she's going to do another Zoom with us at Christmas.
Great.
Um,
Thank you.
Great. How about Shirley's question? Shirley, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask Wes. Shirley Bender.
Is she still here?
I see ya. There you go.
Oh, her audio isn't working.
I see you, Shirley, but I'm not hearing you.
Yeah.
Okay, the question she wrote is, Wes, please give me your thoughts on, quote, when did God become a denomination? That's when the trouble began, I believe.
Yeah. Well, that's Empire Baptized. But a short answer to that for a long book. It's sometimes shocking to Christians to grapple with the fact that the Bible was not written for or to Christians. It just wasn't. Show me where it was. It's just not. But God, I just lost my. I've talked for an hour now. I lost my thought.
Yeah, so she's asking about when did God become a
Yeah.
denomination, which
So
is
when the first philosophers who became so-called church fathers, people like Clement, Alexandria, got a hold of these texts, they assumed that they were about a new religion. They never argue that. They don't argue it from the text or make historical argument. They just assume there's something called Christianity, and that's what they're talking about. There's a wide variety of groups in the 1st and 2nd century who are claiming these texts as formational for them, but they're not organized in anything official. They're just groups of people, and scholars later put labels on them like Gnostics and things like that. But as far as you know, they're just groups of people with no formal structure. It's really not until you get imperial support with Constantine that you get institutional religion in that sense. But I want to be clear in saying that many people had written, the reason I wrote Empire Baptized is that the myth that it was all great for 3 centuries, then Constantine came along and ruined it, is just not historically true. I was triggered for this by the work of a great African-American scholar named Alan Callahan, who gave up a career at Harvard to work with indigenous folks in the favelas of Brazil, because Harvard disgusted him and he just wanted to be immediately with the poor. And I've not been able to reach him ever since. But at one point he was in Seattle and we went for lunch at Pike Place Market. And I asked him, when do you think it went wrong? When do you think the liberating, nonviolent, peaceful message of Jesus began to move toward imperial Christianity? His answer said just straightforwardly is before the New Testament was over.
Mm.
And I realized he was right with the fake letters of Timothy and Titus, right? Forging letters in Paul's name because it was too radical. They needed to tame it. And so you see in 1 Timothy 3, the bishop with a LinkedIn job description. All right. Bishop has to have a family. He's got to be not drink too much. He's got to be a man of good morals. You know, it says nothing about his faith. It's just got to be a respectable citizen. That's where it's already starting there. That quest for Roman respectability. And in fairness, being not respected by Rome had consequences. You know, you could die. You could, short of that, you could lose customers. That's probably the worst effect for most people. People stop doing business with you and then you'd starve, right? It's not like losing customers is some trivial thing. You know, people won't buy what you're selling, you starve, you and your whole family. So if I have to choose between starving and denying Jesus, you know, well, if you've got a community full of people, and again, John, some of you know this from places of poverty that I don't know, you find ways. I remember reading the Orbis collection of essays and testimonies about Oscar Romero. Orbis had this series of the masters, you know, and some of it's Romero's quotes and then quotes from the people. And there's this beautiful page, I used to read it in class every time, where people said, our discovery of the Bible was like an earthquake because it turns the tortilla over. you know, and I just love that image, right, of turning the tortilla over, you know, and but they realized that as empowering as it was from a liberation theology perspective, it was deadly. And we know what's happened. Evangelicals have taken over Central America because their message isn't deadly. You know, it's really hard to maintain this over the long haul. You know, it's really hard to actually risk your life. And whether that's literally dying or going to jail or giving up your income or giving up toxic relationships, you know, it's hard. And we mostly don't want to do it. You know, even Jesus says to Peter after he says 3 times, "Do you love me?" Later, someone will take you where you do not want to go. You'll glorify God that way. But it doesn't say you'll change your mind and want to go. He says, you do not want to go there. You will not want to go there, but you will go. Jesus didn't want to go there. What's his prayer the night before? Take this cup away from me. But your will, not mine, be done. Right? So once fear sneaks back in, right? Once we're concerned, what'll people think of us? What'll be it's all over. It's all over.
It's
You know,
powerful. Wes, Shirley has another question.
Yeah.
Here. She said she read the Bible 36 years ago. My thought then and now is that it's a love story about God, God's love for us. And let me finish.
The good parts are, the religion of creation parts are. Religion of empire parts are, God is to be feared. It's not a love story. I mean, look at that passage in Deuteronomy. You kill them or I'll kill you. You know, but there is a love story. My new friend Rob Dalrymple in Mesa, Arizona, who works internationally with folks in India and all kinds of interesting things. He's an evangelical who's found the light. And he just published a new book on Revelation, which used some of mine but his own stuff, and it's called Revelation, a Love Story. And he's really trying to help evangelicals here that the book of Revelation is not about God's going to come down and destroy them all, but it's a story of deep love that just refuses to give up. Jesus comes back for more. You know, Ezekiel portrays a God who gets sick of it. You know, I gave you everything and you kept whoring on me. Like I was so faithful to you and you just kept open your legs. It's an ugly image, but there it is for everybody else. And yet I'm still not quitting on you. I'm going to restore you. I'm going to rebuild you. The dead bones will come back to life. God just can't help God's self. You know, life comes out of death. Keeps coming, keeps coming, keeps coming, keeps coming. So as long as we're not afraid, there's no need for denominations and institutions. We don't have to define what we believe. We just need to look into somebody else's eyes when they're vulnerable and go, I see you. I see we're together. I see we share it. And then we can share stories with each other from that place, right? And look, tell me about yourself, you know, and we can discover how we've been hurt and how we've been healed and all that good stuff. But we don't need any of that. That's the problem, you know, defending institutions. And Weldon, I know, putting a note in there about what I say something about my journey back to being Jewish, or more to not back to, but more to claiming that. And I'm actually, I really relate to Simone Weil. Any of you know Simone Weil, the great French worker writer in the early part of the 20th century, who said, my vocation is to live at the intersection of Christianity and everything that's not Christianity. And I'm feeling that just personally right now, to be kind of an intersectional thing, you know, between the church that I've been a part of for 35 years and everyone else out there, not to make them Christians, but to recognize that they're already part of the same body. So
let's go to Tatanka. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Tatanka, and then we'll look at Nancy's question. And I see your question, Paul, about John 17, so I'll come back to
that. Thank you, Wes. I want to have you expound a little bit on community. I know the conditioning of being products of empire and products of the limitations of language, etc. I first tend to do things on my own. I am been part of community, and you alluded, you say, being asked to go, get yourself killed is not an easy thing. But then you said when you get together with others. So I want you to talk about that, about what happens when the beauty or the magic that happens when we don't do things alone, that enables us to get out of our own way when we see each other.
So I want to really raise up the Church of All Nations in Minneapolis that I mentioned earlier. They've been such a gift to me, and not just because they've been using this book for their formation for the last 12 years, which they have. They're a community of people of incredible ethnic diversity and age diversity, although they're mostly young, mostly 20s and 30s and 40s, as far as I can see. And they are the most intentional group of people I've ever met. They all live in shared housing. They have 9 houses the church owns, and they all live in shared housing. They have practiced permaculture. I gave them 4 Zoom talks, and they thanked me with a box full of botanicals from their gardens, soap, candle, soup mix, and things that they make and use to raise a few dollars for the community and to give us gifts. And they're really faced it from both sides. In Minneapolis, this is public record, so I'm not telling a confidential story here, and it's sadly a conflict with friends of ours. But anyway, there are white trans folks who have challenged them on trans issues, and there's been this ugly thing of white trans people criticizing people of color as a community, and it's crossing those kinds of lines. But they faced into that, and they faced into pushback from the Presbyterian denomination of which they're formally a part. And they've built their own seminary, the underground seminary, where almost every member has been through a thorough biblical and theological formation in liberation theology and my work and the work of all the kind of people that John's talking about that we know and love and have been meant so much for us. And they're living it every minute of their day. And when I talk to them, I can just see it in them. Even across Zoom, they're all sitting in one room. I can see how much they love each other. You just feel it in the air, even across the Zoom space. So that's just one. But they think I'm serving them by being them. It's like what I was saying about the poor. It's such a gift for me to spend an hour in their presence, even on Zoom, that I could just do it forever, because it just feeds me so much to think, God, there they are. It's not just theoretical. They're making music out of this, song sheet. And I'm sure we all have stories like that. I've had experiences like that. The community that Liz and I were a part of, Bide and me, for all those years that we were reading John's Gospel and Luke's Gospel, wasn't intentional on that level. We didn't all live together. We didn't have economic interdependence. But there were strands of it. There were strands of when people were in need, not just saying good luck, but providing the material needs. There were genuine relationships with the poor. There were risks for justice and peace. Suburbia has wide arms, and will always welcome you back into its cushiony embrace. And I think it's probably the most difficult field in which to fertilize discipleship is American suburbia, because it was designed to protect you from all that. And yet many people in that group have gone out of their comfort zones and done many things and changed their lives. And so, that's just a little bit from my experience. But we didn't continue it. And that was Susan, my choice, not because of hostility. It wasn't that we had a big breakup or anything, but I just felt the need to create a space to let the Spirit guide me to doing different things for a while, having done, 18 years of weekly Bible study with the same people. I just felt I need to, open some space. But many of them are still continuing to meet at another member's house. So it continued. So
Wes, can I give you a question from Nancy?
Yeah.
Thank you, Tatanka. So she's just asking, what do we say to other Christians or fundamentalists or Christian nationalists, all of us, who love these particular passages about empire and killing for the empire? And
I love you.
tell us about that.
Tell them I love you.
And actually, Jesus calls us to a greater vision of love and peace rather than killing beyond that. Can we
What does
say
Paul say? When you do good to those who persecute you, you pour hot coals on their head, right? What's a greater thing to disarm people who are angry at you or disagree with you by saying, I love you? and mean it, not just as a thing to say, but be in a place where you can authentically look at those people with embodied love and recognize that they're hurt, they're wounded. Something's gone wrong in their lives that you don't know what it is that's led them to depend upon that kind of idea and outcome. I don't think anybody comes to that kind of deep racism, deep xenophobia with the kind of passion unless they've been hurt. Like, I had friends when I was a lawyer who were free market economist sort of people, and they didn't believe in regulation, but they weren't mean about it. They just had a different understanding of the economy. I disagreed, but we could still have a beer together. Like, it was just an idea we disagreed on. But what we're seeing now is so different. It's so angry. It's so hateful. And hate is always an expression of fear. And you can't reason with people who are afraid. You can just love them. That's what God does with us, right? When we're afraid, when we're lonely, I'm with Emmanuel. I'm with you. I'm not going to fix it. I can't make it go away, but I can be with you while you're experiencing it. And I don't think you can condescend to people and go, you must be really hurt. No, you can't do that. But you can just love people and try to see
That's
them.
very powerful. Wes,
Try
I
to
just-
come see, and if any kind of intimate opportunity comes, invite story sharing. What led you to these views? Why do you feel that way? What experience have you had with immigrants that have led you to hate them so much or be afraid of them so much? It's amazing what can come out of that. Takes time.
So Paul asks you about John 17 and
Yeah,
the concept of
unity.
unity.
So Susan, my ministry is abide in me, John 15, abide in me as I abide in you. We are one. We just don't live like it, but we are. It's just a biological, empirical fact. We're one. Teilhard de Chardin, your great Jesuit ancestor, John, knew that so deeply. As a scientist and mystic that he was, when he talks about the noosphere, what a brilliant notion the noosphere was, that when we really have our acts together, in other words, when we've practiced metanoia and we're really embodying Christ here, then the earth will be surrounded by a layer parallel to the atmosphere of pure thought that is God's thought, that we can feed on and tap into. He got that. He's just saying, we just need to recognize it. We are one. There is no real division between us because we are all the earth. One of Sue's great verbal phrases that I love is from Genesis is humans are inspired earth. Genesis 2:7, right? We are earth stuff and God's breath. We are inspired earth.
Literally, yeah.
Literally, we are earth with God's spirit in it. And so
Lovely.
we are one. The task of unity is just waking up.
So we got
and
5 minutes
recognizing it.
left, Wes, and there's 2 questions. And our first one I'll sum is from Carolyn. And she says it might be tangential, but a surprising number of her friends are suddenly interested into the Gospel of Thomas, which she's never read. And do you have any thoughts on that, or whether it's getting to be a moment like that? My thought is, who doesn't love it because there's no cross in it?
Yeah.
And the church was right to drop it out of the canon, and thank
Yeah.
God it didn't make it.
Agreed.
Is that what you think too?
There are many gospels. There are dozens
Yeah.
of texts that are called the gospel of something. Most of them are not gospels in the generic sense we think. They're not narratives of Jesus or collections of sayings and things. Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Judas, Gospel of Mary, make appearances, like suddenly oh, we just discovered something. Scholars have known about them forever. They're not new things. But novelty. Oh, it's something new. The secret, that's what made the stupid book, The Da Vinci Code, so popular. One of the worst books ever written, in my opinion. Just a horrible, horrible book. But it sold millions of copies because it dangles out to people. Ooh, Mary was married. She had children. We love that kind of shit. That kind of, ooh, there's a mystery that's being revealed. You can read the Gospel of Thomas online for free anytime. It's worth reading. It's worth reading to hear how some people thought. It's got some good things in it. It's got some things we disagree with. It's not against the law or anything. You can read it. But as you're saying rightly, John, it's not part of our sacred collection. That doesn't mean it's evil. that means it's not the collection we turn to when we're saying these are the texts that make us who we are as a people.
Yeah, it's very watered down and feels good, and it's not a resistance to empire.
No, it's not.
It's very powerful. Now, I hope you'll laugh at my friend Concetta's question. Maybe you saw it.
I didn't. I'm ready to
For
laugh.
us simple-minded folks, this is for me too. Can you sum all this up? In other words, that's why and I'm saying, yes, please, Wes, or maybe a couple of summaries from all of this. And tell us again about the choice between religion of empire and creation, what it means for us
If we
today.
recognize what I just
But
said,
any other little summations for us?
if we recognize, not in our heads, but in our bodies, in our whole self, we are all connected. Not just something I believe in as an idea, but something I know through every cell of my being. Then everything else out there is part of me. Why would I want to hurt it? Why would I choose to hurt it? It's all for my benefit and me for its benefit. We're all part of this flow. The alternative is fear. But what if? And so we build an alternative. We put our trust in ourselves. You know, if we want to say there's original sin in the Bible, it's not in the Garden of Eden. The word sin is not mentioned in the Garden of Eden. The first time sin is mentioned in chapter 4. The first actual time sin is mentioned is around Cain in the city building. But my understanding, having done this work as long as I have, is the sin is God made the world and said it's good, and humans said we can make it better.
Yeah, that's wow. So you're saying then to just live in this great unity and reject all the lies of the culture and the empire, and if necessary, resist that too. I mean, that's how I see
And
Jesus going
gradually,
farther.
there's a reason why the Exodus story has it taking 40 years to leave. I mean, it's a joke. The story's full of lots of jokes. It's a joke. Like in the Joseph story, Jacob sends them to Egypt. They get back in a verse. It's like no big deal. It's a trade route. People are travelers. They see these Ishmaelite travelers. Everybody goes from Egypt to Palestine. It's a trade route. It takes 40 years because that's symbolic of a birth. 40 is the biblical number for pregnancy, for transformation, right? So the time in the desert is time in the womb. The Jordan River is the birth canal. It takes them 40 years because you don't go from a sperm and an egg to a human overnight. It takes a process. Paul took 3 years to figure out what did this crazy road to Damascus experience.
So what are you
supposed to do
saying
with
that means for us right now?
That we recognize that our sense of time is so distorted, but not unique to our moment. It's distorted in our moment because of technology and all kinds of things. But look in Revelation 6. How long, O Lord, do those who've been killed, those who've given their lives, say, till there's justice? How long? And the answer is, wait a little while till the number is full. To say, on our timeline, we understandably want it now. But God's timeline is not our timeline. It's only been 2,000 years since Jesus. That's nothing. That's nothing. Go to the Grand Canyon and see God's sense of time, right? See God working over hundreds of millions of years, building things up a millimeter a year, and over thousands of years, you've got a mountain, So if we survive the mess that we've put ourselves in, my sense is it's the long haul. The Bible sees it as 7th generation. Maybe we should say 70th generation. 7 generations is probably long enough to put our foresight out to. But as you know, John, and we know, and you told a great story about your encounter with Dan Berrigan that I'll repeat third hand just to show your word becomes story that becomes gospel too, where you were on a speaking tour or something, or civil disobedience, I forget which it was, and it wasn't a great turnout. And you were disappointed. Why aren't big crowds coming? And you said, Dan looked at you with shock and said, what made you think that preaching the gospel would make you successful?
He said that many different ways. I still haven't learned the lesson, though.
We all haven't, because we
Why
all
aren't there
I want my
100,000
radical
people
Bible
listening to
videos to be
Wes?
seen by everybody, damn it. But we have to learn to embrace that we just do what we can do, and we're not responsible for the outcome. And
Well,
Liz has taught me, and Sue has taught me
Mhm.
so often, like this Church of All Nations. How did I know that for 12 years they were working on my book? I asked Jin, the pastor, why didn't you invite me sooner? And he said, well, out of my Korean cultural context, I didn't feel like it was okay to go to you cold unless someone was a mediator. So I needed a mediator. But as soon as this Sawyer introduced herself to me at the festival, she said, get him here. You know? But I had no idea that my work had resulted in this beautiful community feeding on it for all those years. We don't know the consequences of our actions. You don't know, John, how many people have read your books, have been converted like Paul from selling fancy cars to serving AIDS victims in Africa. What an incredible story that was of transformation. You know, bless you, Paul, for that.
Well,
I
on
hope you
that
tell that
happy,
story
hopeful
everywhere
note,
you
yes.
go, because more people who did what you used to do need to hear that you can leave that behind and do what you're doing now with your beautiful wife, who is somewhere off screen, but I got a chance to see her lovely smile. There
There's
she is.
Paul and Hope.
Look at that. That's
So, Wes,
what he
let's
left
wrap it
selling
up there.
Ferraris for. You know, thank
Let's
you, Hope.
So,
So
Wes,
for the
on
long
behalf of
haul.
everybody, I want to wrap it up, friends, because
Yep, it's time.
Let's all join in thanking Wes once again for being here and for sharing your vision and insights into the Bible. It's very refreshing and exciting and stirs up a lot in all of
And
us.
thanks be to the Creator who allows us to be able to do this with each other.
Thanks be. And the next Zoom will be at the end of September with Ken Budigan, based on his book From Violence to Wholeness. I've asked him to do a kind of he's been teaching nonviolence for 40 years. So to do his basic how to teach nonviolence course for
And that book's an absolute classic
it's
too.
great. And then I'm forgetting all who I've got, but Jim Finley will be back, and Elizabeth Johnson will be back, and Simone Campbell, Sister Campbell, who did Nuns on the Bust, will be here with us.
Nobody knows more people than you do, John.
I know. And I just recorded 10 podcasts with a whole slew of incredible people. So they're all coming out through September. And the podcasts are just amazing, everybody. But I need you, because the numbers are so small, they're only 3,000. I want everybody to go and tell hundreds of people about the Nonviolent Jesus podcast. No, seriously, it's really good stuff. And I thank you for your support. And so Wes will stay on for a few minutes, as I will. If you want to, you don't have to, but I'm going to officially sign off right now and say God bless everyone on the recording. And thank you, Wes. And those who want to can stick around. So take care and see you again.
And thank you.
Another
I just want to
Gratitude
acknowledge there
Tuesday.
are a number of little thank you comments in the chat. So I just want to acknowledge, happy to be here, and I'm glad you found it helpful. So thank you.
Great.
Thank you
Okay.
both.